Good afternoon, everybody. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government, coming to you live here from Washington, D.C. area to talk a little bit about a couple of things that are going on. I appreciate you taking time to spend some time with us on Friday, and we're going to use your time judiciously here. Hopefully, you'll learn a little bit, and hopefully, I'll learn a little bit. One of the things, the headline that we sent around dealt with Saudi Arabia and Joe Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia. The president's still receiving criticism for having gone to Saudi Arabia. And the criticism is built around the idea that Saudi Arabia is such a rogue state that we should have nothing to do with them. And that's just stupid. That's just plain and simple stupid and against American interests. The demonization, Saudi Arabia, let's be clear, Saudi Arabia has draconian policies. They practice Sharia law. They are the Saud government, the House of Saud, is the keepers of Mecca and Medina, the two holiest shrines for Islam. They have people there who are the most extreme Islamists in the world, based in Saudi Arabia. Lots to be said about Saudi Arabia that's counter to Western culture. What is also true is that the Saudi Arabia has more oil than anybody else. And it is a follow-on to that is after the OPEC oil embargoes, the Saudis essentially made a deal with the U.S. government, with President Nixon at the time, and decided that they would only trade oil in dollars. And by creating the petrodollar, they effectively made the dollar the world reserve currency, not the franc, not the French franc, not the British sterling. The US dollar became the world reserve currency because the Saudis said, we're not trading anything, our oil, in anything but dollars. So if you want to buy oil, you're going to need to convert your currency over to dollars and send them to us. And they did that because it's a stable currency. We were the largest country in the world. We're the most powerful country in the world. And that has had an influence on the world economy and has allowed the United States to export a lot of our inflation that we would have based upon our surplus, our excess spending, our deficit spending. So the Saudis are important to us, not just because of oil, but because they choose to trade oil in dollars. And so those who want to sit there and say that President Biden shouldn't have met with the Saudis, with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, that's silly. That's counter to U.S. interests. Now, but what's really silly is that the president went there to meet with him, but because he was of dual mind about what was going to happen, they didn't get a deal done in advance. You never want to send your president to go meet with a world leader without a deal in advance of what you're going to get to, something to sign, some bottom line that you're able to affect, some joint announcement you're able to get. Instead, he wandered into Saudi Arabia with no plan, with really no clear objective, and ended up coming out of there with all downside. From the left, they're attacking him because he bumped fists with the head of the person who is effectively running Saudi Arabia, and so he got the negative from the left. He didn't get any more oil out of it. In fact, the Saudis said, we're not pumping any more oil. So he didn't get any objective in terms of increasing oil production. And his stated purpose, as strange as it might be, was to increase better relations between the Israelis and the Saudis. And Donald Trump already did that through the Abraham Accords. The Saudis and the Israeli government are actually much closer because of the mutual interests they have to stand against Iran. And the fact is, Biden's the one who sat there and has exacerbated the problem with Iran by giving the Iranians a bunch of money and by allowing our money to be used for terrorist groups that are attempting to take down the House of Saud. So the stupidity of going to meet with the Saudi government had nothing to do with meeting with the Saudi government. It had everything to do. If you don't have an objective, not trying to accomplish anything, you don't have an end game, it's always going to come out looking, you're going to come out looking dumb. And if you just want it to be a PR move because you want to be seen with somebody, that's great. But Biden didn't want to be seen with him. So I don't understand what they were doing. It was bad, it was a misuse of the office of the presidency. But having said that, those who are criticizing Biden for having gone and met with him, those people are myopic, and they want to build it all around the case of Khashoggi. Okay, the Saudi citizen who was murdered by agents of the Saudi government in a Saudi embassy, and he was a columnist for the Washington Post. And what a lot of people don't know about Khashoggi is he was also an agent of the government of Qatar, the Qatar government over there. And he was an agent of Qatar. So he was an agent of a foreign government. That many of the columns that he actually wrote for the Washington Post were edited by the government of Qatar. And that he was, and Qatar is an enemy of Saudi Arabia. So he was an agent, a Saudi citizen who was an agent of a foreign country that was an enemy of the Saudi government. Now, does that excuse murdering him? No, it does not. But does it explain why they were a little bit miffed at him? It certainly puts it into context that he wasn't a journalist just doing his job. He was a guy who was acting as an agent for a power that is a domestic enemy of the Saudi government. So having said all that, it complicates the situation a little bit. It doesn't excuse the murder of Khashoggi, but what it does is at least there's some context that you can understand sort of what was going on and why the Saudi government might have been looked at Khashoggi as being an enemy of their state. So that's the kind of the role in that. A lot of I was going to go and I'm supposed to be pushing these buttons. Let me push a button here because that's what they tell me to do. You'll look right here and you see we have an article that was found in Roll Call where Senator Josh Hawley, good guy from Missouri, says typically when the president goes, it's for closing a deal. There doesn't seem to be the closing of anything. That was James Langford from Oklahoma. He's right. You have Josh Hawley from Missouri said, this administration, as far as I can tell, has no guiding principle, talking about the Biden administration's failure to actually have basic principles that they're following. Tim Kaine, who is a Democrat, former VP nominee with Hillary Clinton out of Virginia, opposed the trip altogether because the left wants to pretend that Saudi Arabia is an illegitimate country in the world, and yet they want to lift up Iran, which is one of the most oppressive regimes in the world, and lift them up as being some kind of a trade partner with us for some reason. So there's a lot of, let's put it this way, hypocrisy in the left. You can't really do one without the other. They're adamantly against Iran or against Saudi Arabia. They're adamantly in favor of Iran. They want to have Iran, do an Iranian deal, even though Iran is every other moment says when they get nuclear weapons, they're going to point them at Israel and try to destroy Israel. So we look at Iran would be the first, nuclear terrorist state that has the ability to project nuclear weapons into enemy territory. You could say North Korea is somewhat held back by China. Nobody has brakes on Iran. And so they're dangerous. They're one of the most dangerous countries in the world. And the Biden idea is if we keep sending them enough money, they'll like us. Well, we know that doesn't work. So when you get to you look at the Saudi Arabia visit, it's the other obvious point on it. And I think enough cartoons and memes, and probably Tony Bronco did some on this. But the obvious meme is, if you want to save money, go to Texas and Oklahoma to get oil, because let us pump our own oil. Let's be able to get pipelines to get the oil from where it's pumped to where it needs to be refined. Let's open up new oil refineries, or open up refineries that have been closed based on environmental policies, reopen those refineries and be able to refine more oil here, drive our own gasoline and diesel prices down. Those are obvious things that he could have been doing, but the Green New Deal doesn't allow for domestic production of oil and fossil fuels. The Green New Deal is about destroying America's economy. It has nothing to do with the environment, because if it had anything to do with the environment, they would be importing every manufacturing job they could to the United States. Because when we manufacture it as clean as it can be manufactured. And if you have it manufactured in China, it's manufactured in the dirtiest, fastest way possible, and with no regard for the environment whatsoever. So if you actually want to have a cleaner environment, push manufacturing to the United States. Push use our system, because our system incentivizes clean and doesn't incentivize dirty. The Chinese, on the other hand, don't care. And that, because it's about industrial domination with the Chinese, and that is what they're doing, and that's what we're allowing. And the Green New Deal is a tool in terms of continuing to exacerbate that problem. And with the Chinese getting obviously everybody knows, getting a pass on any of the Paris climate goals until 2030. So once we export all of our manufacturing, once we become completely dependent upon Chinese solar panels, once we become completely dependent upon Chinese windmills, made windmills, and the like, that's when the Chinese will start worrying about climate. Trust me, they're not going to have to worry about climate, because they will control everything, and that will be a very bad 21st century for the world. So it's a fraud. We know it's a fraud. The climate change stuff is a political excuse to impose socialism in America. And get this, our good friend at the White House, the new press secretary, I'm not even bothering knowing her name, because I don't think she's going to be there very long. But the new press secretary said this week, well, we're not going to push for a climate emergency, but we're willing to, but we haven't taken it off the table. What a climate emergency means is they say, oh, the climate change is so bad that we're going to declare a national emergency and allow ourselves, the government, to be able to, not the government, the executive branch, to be able to declare all sorts of things, like stopping the import of oil, stopping the export of oil, stopping the extraction of oil, ending all federal oil production on all federal leased land, a whole series of things that could shut down the ability for domestic oil production, the transport of oil, and with the idea that we're going to sit there and somehow we're going to be reliant upon windmills and solar to get ourselves into we'll be in the 18th century. So in terms of energy, so it'll be really great. That's what the climate emergency means, and is a way to get around Congress. And they're holding that out as a threat to try to intimidate Congress into doing some things on their climate agenda that Congress doesn't want to do. And so that's where we're at. It's extremist, it's crazy, and yet that's exactly what the left is pushing the Biden administration to do. And the Biden administration, to their shame, hasn't closed the door on it. So that same Biden administration that's considering a climate emergency sent the president out hand in hand with absolutely no deal negotiated in advance to try to beg the Saudis to put more oil into the marketplace to lower our gasoline prices. It's almost mind-boggling how bungling these group of boobs are. Anyway, let's move on. It's exasperating. Exasperation number 2. This is, as those of you who tuned in a couple of weeks ago when I talked about draining the swamp and some of the things that can be done, I'd encourage you to go back and look at that, that video, because there is a, let me get this thing away. There is a move afoot that right now the discussion in Congress is how to deal with the remote workforce. There was a hearing earlier this week in the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee, subcommittee hearing that was all about the federal workforce and remote work. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about a study that came out from 2020, March of 2020 to December of 2020. The Chief of Staff of Health and Human Services agency said, I want to find out if people are actually working. And it turned out 25% of the people who were being paid by the federal government, by your tax dollars, 25% of the people worked at HHS, Health and Human Services, during the height of the pandemic, when everything was going, the total focus was on healthcare and how we were going to survive the pandemic, when billions upon billions and billions of dollars were poured in fact, trillions of dollars were poured in to all sorts of different ways to try to offset the healthcare challenges that we face. 25% of the civil servants who work for Health and Human Services didn't log into the computer one time. Not one time. Not once. You think they might have just checked, said, hey, what's going on? Let's see what's going on. Nope, not once. The Trump administration, they're going out of office, obviously, in January. The chief of staff had ordered an audit to find out what was going on and discovered that 25% of the HHS civil servants did not log in a single time. So we're trying to do workforce policy. We're trying to do work at home policy from the federal government. And yet we know that in a crisis in the agency that's the point of the spear, 25% of the people didn't even log in. First thing that has to be done, first thing before any policy is enacted relating to work at home as a permanent policy out of the Office of Personnel Management, is they need to do an audit. They need to find out who worked, who didn't work. They need to do it government-wide. Who was working, who wasn't working. At the very least, they need to determine that. Because if you don't, you can't make policy in a world where 25% of the people aren't even checking in. You can't make policy that 75% of the people who were checking in, let's make an assumption those 25% who are checking in actually had important functions to do. Actually, their job mattered at some level. They were part of this. They're part of the workflow. If you send an email to somebody saying, "Hey, I need your approval on this," or "I need your thoughts on this," and they don't respond, and you're waiting on their response because you're trying to move ahead, and they're the expert, and they don't respond for 9 months, 10 months, that tends to gum up the works a little bit. So who were these people? What were they supposed to be doing? Was this government-wide? If 25% of the workforce government-wide, there's 2.1 million non-postal federal government workers. If 2.1% of them were in fact, or 2.1 million of them had the same absentee rate, failure to log in at all, not once a month, not at all, 525,000 workers got paid, full-time pay, got benefits, and not a single one of them logged in. Over the course of a year, that's $45 billion on average, based on the average salary of a federal government employee. So $45 billion got stolen from the U.S. Treasury by people who didn't report to work for 10 months. It's obscene. It's obscene on its face. So I met with staff people in the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee prior to the hearing and laid this out for them and made some suggestions. But hopefully what we'll be seeing is some legislative action pushing forward on an audit of the federal workforce. And as soon as I get that bill introduced, I'll let you guys know, and so you can take action and start urging members of Congress to do something crazy like co-sponsor it, and begin to put pressure on the Biden administration to deliver actual data about what your federal employees were doing while you were paying them. At the same time, you were struggling to keep them make a living because they shut down the economy. I think that would be an important thing to know. I think we need to do that, and we're working on it hard. But that's just an update on that. I'm going to go and do do a little economic update on jobs claims. A couple 3 weeks ago, we talked about the initial jobs claims. What happens and why we have the jobs claims are now signaling a recession pretty heavily. The way they determine, the Department of Labor determines jobs claims is every single week, the states send in a report on how many people are unemployed who newly filed for unemployment insurance. The report also has how many people remain on unemployment insurance and how long they've been on unemployment. So it has that data in it. So that gets reported into the Department of Labor, the Employment Training Administration. The ETA then goes and compiles it. And then the following Thursday, you get last week's report. So yesterday, you got the report for last week of how many initial unemployment claims were actually filed and how many people were on unemployment insurance in total. And over since April of 2022, the number of new unemployment insurance claims has ticked up pretty steadily. 5,000 a week this week, 4,000 this week, 7,000 the next week, from 166,000 initial unemployment insurance claims, which is a very low number, to this week, 251,000, an 85,000 increase of initial unemployment claims over the course of the last 3.5 months. That is a trend line which shows that the layoffs are occurring. These are people who are eligible for unemployment insurance, haven't been fired for cause. They're laid off. So layoffs are occurring. Now, the number that we were watching, though, is how many people are in the total unemployment, getting on unemployment insurance, because that number determines whether or not the economy is sucking up, is essentially absorbing the newly unemployed, or are we seeing there being a growth in the number of people who are on the unemployment ranks? Up until 3 weeks ago, there was no growth in the unemployment ranks. In fact, it continued to shrink, which meant the economy had so many jobs in it that you could bounce from one job to another and never show up in terms of not being long-term sustained unemployed, at least in the insurance system. So that was a tell. 3 weeks ago, that number bounced up. Last week, it fell down a little bit. This week, it bounced up significantly more. It bounced about 120. We're now about 122,000 more people on unemployment insurance last week than were on it 3 weeks ago. And so what that means is the economy is beginning to show signs that it's not going to be able to absorb the newly unemployed as rapidly as it was before. That's a sign that the jobs economy is, in fact, beginning to change. We're seeing a transition. From a practical perspective, it's not going to be a surprise to anybody out there when we show that we're in two quarters in a row. We're in a recession. We'll find that data out in next week on the 28th, I believe, of July. But we'll get that we'll get the quarter two initial look at it. Right now, we've got the Atlanta GDP now, which tries to predict that. Shows about 1.6% decline in the economy. So it's likely we'll end up showing a recession 2 quarters in a row of declined economy. But remember, that will be a declining economy, most likely based upon compared to inflation. The economy, did it grow faster than inflation, or did it grow slower than inflation? And if it grows slower than inflation, it's declining. If it grows faster than inflation, it's accelerating. And so that's your that's the determiner. That's what caused some confusion, but that's what to look at. So, folks, the answer is the jobs economy is beginning to decline. A number which is pretty much ignored usually, which is the initial unemployment insurance claims, has shown since April that we are increasing the number of people who are on unemployment insurance. Now we're up into the 250,000, 251,000 number on initial claims. That number is creeping up into the yellow area, not the green area. The yellow area of being concerned, and so we're seeing every indication is that this economy is not only slipping into a technical recession, but is slipping into a time of economic slowdown. And there's stuff that can be done about it. It's fact is, if the president wanted to do stuff, he could go and he could say, we're going to use the Defense Production Act to turn the 3 refineries that have been shut down in the last couple of years and turn them into diesel producing refineries. He could immediately allow for certain pipelines to be built, pipelines to be expanded to get oil from point A to point B, to get natural gas from point A to point B. He could open up the drilling in Anwar and be able to open up a field we've been fighting over for 20 years. He could do those things. Because ultimately, while that would not have an impact in the 3-month period, it'd have an impact in the 6 to 9 month period. And the actions you can take today are impactful 6 months to 9 months from now, largely. You could do some things on a fiscal side of things. The challenge is we've got an inflationary cycle because of helicopter money, just saying we're going to give everybody a stimmy check. And so the typical response of a Keynesian is, okay, well, we're going into recession. We need to spend money to get out of it. The problem is the reason we went into a recession is because you spent money on inflation and created an inflationary cycle that we're now in. And we're really at the beginning of the inflationary cycle. And so by re-stimulating the inflationary cycle, you're not actually you're creating an environment where you're going to put fuel on the primary fire that is in fact causing the country to be in recession. So it's one of those things where you look at it, you say there's not going to be a lot of good answers from a fiscal perspective. But the one thing they could do, and it's counter to what the Keynesians ever want to do, if they sat there and if the Congress said, we are going to have, we're not going to spend any additional money, we're going to make it flat. We're basically, how much money we spend today is going to be how much money we spend tomorrow. We're not going to increase the budget. We're going to actually make it so everybody's got to grow by 0. If Congress were to say we're going to grow budgets by a net 0 over the next year, inflation then would cut the size and scope of government by whatever inflation rate was, let's say 5-6%, simply because the value of those dollars being spent would be less. So you could effectively create an environment where the size and scope of government was cut strictly by not spending the same amount of money and let inflation, the lesser value of money, do it. You would then see, because you're not stimulating the economy, you're and pouring more money into the economy, you would end up you wouldn't be driving private equity market or private bond markets in a way that doesn't make sense. You would be, more money would be able to flow into private investments, and we'd create, and you get out of your recession that way. The other way you get out of your recession is, once again, open up the spigot. As Sarah Palin, who hopefully will be elected to Congress in Alaska, as Sarah Palin once said famously, drill, baby, drill. But it's not just drill, baby, drill. It's got to be refine, baby, refine. We have to have refineries that are open and operating, because demand for oil goes up. It continues to go up. But if you have a finite refinery capacity, you're going to have a natural increase in the cost of refined fuels regardless. So we need to increase refinery capacity. CEO of Chevron said, why would we increase refinery capacity? It's a massively expensive investment, And the world's letting us know we don't want increased refined oil. So he's listening to stakeholders, and he should stop doing that. The bottom line on that is, if this government wanted to do something, get the refineries that have been shut down over the last 3 years, get them back up and running, specifically to refine diesel and get diesel and increase the supply of diesel oil, or diesel fuel rather. And by doing that, it would help our whole supply chain. It would lower the cost of trucking. It would create more of a boost than virtually anything you could do, because the cost of transporting goods is built into the inflation number. If you want to lower the cost of inflation, lower the cost of transporting goods. By having diesel fuel costs driven down, it costs less to run a truck. More trucks are willing to drive short haul runs. It makes the entire system work more smoothly. So if he actually wanted to do something, he could do that. It'd have a major impact. Truth is, they don't. This is the policy they want. They want to pretend like they're doing something. They're willing to send the president around begging hand in hand to countries like Venezuela and the like to try to get their oil. But the bottom line is, they don't really want the oil. This price increase is designed to wean America off of oil, off of natural gas. And the only way you can get people to adopt a cheaper, other renewable fuels, solar, wind, algae, whatever you're going to want to use. The only way you get them to adopt that is to make those fuels less expensive than the fuels you've got. And the truth is, coal, natural gas, and oil are the cheapest fuels available, and they would be the only way you can make them more expensive is by making them so they're less available, or the environmental cost of providing them is so high that they're not, you can't rely upon them. And folks, that's the policy that this administration is pursuing. And quite honestly, it's a policy that a lot of Republicans are pushing, with their all the above strategy rather than a market-based strategy. So that's where we are on that. It's not intractable. It's something that can be dealt with. I've just told you one of the ways of dealing with it. Problem is, the people in charge, the people in the Biden administration, are not willing to do the things necessary to work through this. And consequently, it's a crisis of their creation. And now they want to make it so the solutions they'll have, which is more green energy, is their answer to the crisis that they created, by making it so the abundance we've been blessed with of energy in this country becomes negated by the high cost of getting it out of the ground and burning it. And folks, that's how you make a rich country poor. And that's what they're doing. I'm just going to close with, and I'm supposed to be clicking up all these articles and stuff, but I'm going to close with something a little bit different here. We've been talking about I'm trying to find the thing. It doesn't matter. We've been talking about some things on our Daily Torch. And I would encourage you to, if you don't, to sign up, go to dailytorch.com and subscribe. We are doing something that people aren't talking about. Right now, 13% of our military is vulnerable to being fired because they've only been partially vaccinated. Of that 13%, 26% of the overall Army, 26%, over a quarter of our Army, U.S. Army, could be fired for failure to be vaccinated, fully vaccinated. It's a disaster waiting to happen. The bureaucrats who don't pay much attention to the effect of their actions, who knows what they will do. But what we know is that is a sword hanging over our soldiers' head. What we also know is that if you are looking to re-up, you're not going to re-enlist if you think you may be fired and get a general discharge rather than if you're going to get a general discharge, which is a negative, rather than an honorable discharge, you're not going to re-up to put yourself in that position. So you're going to leave the military. You're going to retire early. You're not going to encourage your kids to join the military if you think that all you're going to be dealing is subjecting them to wokeism, but not with a philosophy being taught through CRT that America isn't the greatest country on earth and isn't worth defending. Sorry, not signing my kids up for that. And I'm certainly not going to sign them up for that and then say, oh, yeah, and Joe Biden can send them around the world anywhere he wants and abandon them as they did with Afghanistan. So we've got a problem. We've got a recruitment problem on one hand because the demoralization of not just the troops themselves, but of veterans and those people who love the country. You fly an American flag in front of your house, you're more, you're, who knows, with all the crazy stuff going on, you're actually viewed as the enemy by the people in charge of this particular, the Biden administration. So it's a real problem in recruiting new people to be in the military. And when you say, gee whiz, we might throw your whole career away because you don't choose to be fully vaccinated. At that point, people don't re-up and you end up with all sorts of other problems. We're facing an aggressive China. We're facing an aggressive Iran. We're facing nukes. We're facing North Korea, who at any time can do stupid stuff. We have problems with all over the world that are potential hotspots that we may be drawn into. I didn't even mention Ukraine. And yet we have this sword hanging over our troops' heads, saying, if you're not fully vaccinated, we can get rid of you. Well, folks, the Senate needs to do something about that. There's something called the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, and the Senate needs to put language in very simply. It says the vaccine mandate in the military is over. They also need to do it for the entire government, but the way it works, NDAA is strictly about the military, and so the parliamentarian would only allow an amendment that was strictly about the military. But the Senate can do that. The Senate can say, this is invalid. If Biden wants to take it to court and challenge whether the Senate has the right to stymie a commander-in-chief from dismissing troops for any reason he wants to, he can, Biden can take that to court. He might win, he might not win. We had a big fight about it here internally the other day. But fact of the matter is, the Senate needs to tell Biden, no, this is crazy. We're taking the threat away, and you can help us. You can help us deal with this by going to our getliberty.org site and just signing up. Taking action on the Take Action we have, urging Congress to end the vax mandate on the military. So that's something that's it's there. We're working on it. It's crazy. It's an existential threat to our country. And in any other administration, I would sit there and say, there's no way they'd be stupid enough to do this. I can't say that. So we have to try to get Senate to take action, which they should not have to take. But that's just the reality of where we're at. I'm going to look at a couple of comments here just for a second or two, but we don't have many. I think we've got, I'm going to go to Mitchell Andrews. Mitchell's not a fan of Harris and Biden, obviously. I'm going to just say one of the interesting things that we're facing, and we always have this question. Kamala Harris is Joe Biden's best protection against impeachment or the 25th Amendment being imposed, because she's so obviously outside of her league in terms of being remotely able to be president. And so in a lot of ways, she's the protection. I would argue, though, that if Joe Biden is found to be mentally incompetent, and I think there's a real strong case to be made that he is, then going and trying to fix that problem by subjecting them to the 25th Amendment would, in fact, Kamala Harris gets elevated to president, but then she's not the president of the Senate, and so she's not breaking ties in the Senate, and that's a net win. So, at some level, unfortunately, we got 4-year terms. It was set up in the Constitution. We, unfortunately, for whatever reason, we couldn't get courts to actually take a look at the evidence of fraud. The courts ducked. They decided they didn't want to be involved in it. The fraud was so extensive that the court said, it's too many states. We don't want to get involved in it. And so consequently, you didn't get a Gore v. Bush kind of decision on it. And so you've got so we're stuck with this circumstance. And we have to try to figure out how to put guide rails up for this administration. And quite honestly, that's what this election needs to be focused on, is what guide rails do we need the next Congress to put up so this administration doesn't do bad things, doesn't mess the country up forever. And one of those guide rails is don't fire 26% of the military, which is why I've got the take action up to stop the attack on the potential firing of the military based on the COVID mandates. Let's talk. Let's see. Joe Lee. Tim Johnson, yes, and it's crazy too. I'm sorry. I don't know where I got that. So the Joe Lee has been calling representatives and senators. And by the way, it's okay to call members of the House of Representatives too. The issue has already passed the House, but the House will have to confirm whatever the Senate decides. And having House members yelling about it, say, "Hey, this is a problem. We need to deal with it," helps bolster senators. So this is all hands on deck getting this thing done. And Jolie, I want to thank you for taking action on it. It is really important. Diana, yeah, well, I'm more concerned about millions of people marching to the polls, millions of people getting their neighbors to march to the polls, because we're only going to get rid of this nonsense that's going on is through the ballot box. And I understand the concerns that the ballot box may not be fairly held, but we have to overwhelm them so much, so beat them so badly in so many places that the left doesn't have the resource to cheat big enough to win. The Democrats are now in a position where people who are in what have been previously determined safe Democrat districts, they're now calling around desperately for money because their safe district no longer is safe. They had a D plus 15 district, means that on the last presidential, that Biden beat Trump by 15%. They might be in a D plus 15 district. They're still calling up donors and saying, "I need money." What that means is they're not going to give money to Democrats who are Democrat incumbents are in trouble, or Democrats who are running as in open seats, or Democrats who are running against Republican incumbents, because they need to save the money to protect themselves and spend the money to protect themselves. This is how landslides occur, is when one side can't put a cumulative defense together because they're all trying to protect themselves, and on the other side, everything is flowing their direction, and money, and the people who are in safe seats can give money to the people who are attacking, trying to take new seats, and you end up with a lot more equitable money spend. So challengers can actually spend as much money as the incumbents, or at least get some level of parity. At that point, that's how you win 70 seats, 50 to 70 seats in the upcoming election. Now, Robert Romano in my office would argue that you're not going to get 70 seats in the upcoming election. I would argue that we have the potential of having the biggest Republican majority, I think a high potential of having the largest Republican majority um, in 100 years coming out of this election. I believe we're in a position where the Democrats have fumbled the ball so badly, have bungled everything so badly, and have shown themselves to be not representative of what America's interests are so much that I think this election has the potential of being a lot more like the 1930 election, when the Democrats, in the wake of the Wall Street crash of 29, the Democrats had an overwhelming win in 1930. And then 1932, they consolidated that win and went and basically almost made the Republican Party extinct in 1932. And it took 30 to 40 years. I would argue it took from FDR it took a generation for Republicans to retain, because Eisenhower he was a war hero. He didn't run as a conventional Republican. He was a war hero. So the Eisenhower presidency was an anomaly. Apart from one 2-year time, we didn't have Republicans in control of either house, except for once, until you got to Ronald Reagan, 1980. And we didn't actually pick up control of the House of Representatives, except for one time, I think it was 46. We didn't have control of the House of Representatives again until the Newt Gingrich revolution in 94. So that's 50 years. It's a 50-year period between when you've had essentially legislative hegemonic control. Under Reagan, you had the Senate was in Republican hands from 1980 to 1986. So you had the Senate, but you didn't have both houses. In 1994, you got both houses. And it's 50 years from 1930 to Gingrich, 1994, of Democrats controlling the legislative branch. Folks, I think that's where we're on the verge of being, with having a complete and total destruction of the opposition party. In this case, it's the Democrat Party. And the only question is, will those who are never Trumpers, who are so desperate to attack Donald Trump for anything, will the never Trumpers have their way? And will they be able to effectively split the Republican Party sufficiently to make it so it creates an opportunity for the left to be able to survive? And I think we have an opportunity to wipe them out completely and totally. And then with the 2024 election, I think we can have a generational shift in 2024, similar to what happened in 32. So that's the hope. And we have to be ready to deal with it. We have to be ready to win. We have to be ready to strip away the nonsense every single place around this government, and cut the size and scope of government every place we can, and limit the power of the administrative state, and hold those accountable who have subjected this country to witch hunts and various hearings, and putting people in jail for being in the Capitol, being let in to the Capitol by Capitol Police, taking some selfies and putting them on Facebook, and spending a year in jail. We have to hold those people accountable. We need a lot of reform, and we're only going to get that if we just wipe them out. So millions of people marching on Washington is one thing. I want to wipe them out at the polls so completely, so utterly, that they go away into a hidey hole, and we're able to actually do the fundamental transformation that they claim they wanted to do, but fundamentally transform this country back to a country that is limited government, local control over federal control, and having your individual rights being respected and being of paramount importance, rather than having us all basically them being negotiated away in the halls of Washington, D.C. That's where we need to be. That's where we can be. Together we can do that. And with that, I'm going to let y'all go. And I'm going to try to do this much more frequently. So we'll be seeing you again on Monday. Thank you very much. And we will see you on Monday. With that, Go to dailytorch.com. And if you are not subscribing, please subscribe and tell a friend. Thank you very much.